It started with the sound of laughing, not small, sympathetic laughter, but the kind that fills a room and has edges sharp enough to cut. I was standing in the empty breakroom at Yamamoto Electronics, the awkwardness in my limbs matched only by the bile that was rising in my throat. My supervisor Sato-san had just finished reading a forwarded message out loud, a long late-night chain email I'd sent to myself a few months prior, rambling about Schubert and how one day I would bring the Tokyo Symphony to its knees. I'd been desperate back then, up late at the battered upright in my tiny, overheated apartment, dreaming on blank staff paper. Sato looked up at me, the wrinkles around his eyes deepening into something like pity. "Nakamura-kun," he said, wielding my honorific like a weapon, "we all have dreams, but there is a time to wake up. You're 26. You run inspections on assembly lines." The silence after those words felt like a cold slap. The others, my peers, neckties loose and breaths close, tried to hide their smirks, but the shine in their eyes said everything. People passed me in the hallway for the rest of the day with polite, apologetic bows, as if it wasn't their laughter I'd heard echoing inside the walls. I tried to sort screws by size, but my mind was somewhere else, running along piano keys, hearing phantom symphonies. When I got home that night to the small, dusty apartment in Nerima, the dam burst, my phone chimed. My mother, her picture frozen, soft lines around her mouth, sent a sticker of a bear holding a rice ball. It was meant to comfort, her way of not prying. Across the living room, the cheap digital keyboard sat in shadow. I stared into the dark, my chest hollowing out. I wanted more than anything to call home and say, "You don't have to worry, I'll quit for good." I wanted reassurance that some ember of my family's hope was left for me, but when I imagined my father's disappointed sigh, the heavy silence, I just sat there. I played one clumsy, broken scale on the keyboard, then shut it off. The ridicule didn't fade. Somehow, word had found its way down the grapevine, from my workplace to my local bathhouse to the 7-Eleven where old neighbors noticed me. The worst was at New Year's at home. My father leaned over his sake, smoothing the front page of the Yomiuri Shimbun. "Your mother told me you lost your bonus." He said it quietly, but I could tell he knew about the symphony email too. My older sister Chai, always blunt, jabbed playfully, "At least the family tabloids are interesting this year. Yuto Nakamura, Tokyo's next Mozart." Laughter sharpened around the kotatsu. My uncle muttered, "Dreams are like pickled plums. They're kept for flavor, not eaten as a meal." I smiled, played along, shrank. It took months before the humiliation settled into something more useful inside me. I found myself often past midnight composing. Messy lines sprouted across my staff paper, sometimes shaky with anger, sometimes flowing with remembered hope. I taught myself to hear whole symphonies in the rattle of the trains outside, the creaks in the building. Workdays blurred into nights where I played simple melodies over and over, needing to lose myself in the notes just to remember that there had once been something worth believing in. For years, it was like trudging through rain. I sent demo tracks to orchestras, entered composition contests under fake names. The replies were clipped and cold, "Thank you, not for us." I played cheap background piano at weddings on weekends. Sometimes a granny in pearls would tap my shoulder and request, "Twinkle, twinkle, little star." I took the money, counted it, put my head down. I thought about that breakroom often, the laughing Sato's sigh, the way the fluorescent lights made me feel transparent. Every setback, every letter from a publisher starting with, "We regret to inform you," sent me back to that humiliation. At first, regret tasted like loss, but as years passed it became fuel. I realized no one was going to hand me the life I wanted. Slowly, my music changed. I stayed up late, letting pain and hope filter into my fingers. Some mornings, I'd wake sore and exhausted, but new bars of music would be staring up at me, raw and undeniably mine. I recorded demo after demo, honing, shaping, discarding. About 5 years into this lonely labor, things shifted. I got a call from a small, struggling ensemble in Saitama. They had found a piece of mine, Rain Over Arakawa, on a forgotten blog I'd abandoned. The conductor's voice was nervous but earnest. They wanted to perform it for a small spring concert. There was no talk of money, only an offer to meet the group and see the rehearsal. The first time I heard professional musicians play my music, I broke down in the green room, hiding my tears behind the battered vending machine. The piece, a wandering, swelling melody that reminded me of walking home from the factory, filled the tiny theatre. My name wasn't on the program. To everyone else, I was just a guest with a notebook, but for me, something opened. After the show, a violinist approached Kimura-san, mid-40s, with heavy bags under his eyes and worn fingers. "Did you write that? Don't hide it, I can tell." When I nodded, he offered me a simple bow and said, "There's honesty in it. Don't stop." I didn't. I began composing more, building a network of friends and contacts through those late-night, underfunded gigs. Each felt precarious, but I pressed forward. Gradually, people in the scene began to recognize my name, if only as a promising outsider. I pieced together a life out of short contracts, private lessons, nights composing into the dawn. The hardest battles were back home. My parents still saw my old uniform hung behind the closet door during visits, as if I might return to my real job. My father's voice softened with each passing year, but I could see worry etched into his face, the lingering regret that I was not what he'd hoped. Chai moved up in her consulting firm, her success measured in bonuses and overseas trips, while I counted cup ramen packs. I would come home sometimes during festival seasons, my hands stained black from cheap sheet music ink, and try to carry conversations through the sharp undertone of disappointment. I didn't discuss my new gigs or small triumphs. The room always quieted, a polite hush settling any time I wandered close to the subject of my music. Yet bit by bit my profile grew. Invitations from larger, more recognized ensembles arrived, first at the edges, opening concerts, end-of-program showpieces, competitions where my music played as audiences slipped out for intermissions. I took every opportunity. I watched, listened, learned how to write for woodwinds from veteran oboists with stories longer than my pieces. I learned about orchestration in sweaty, overbright rooms, nerves jangling while musicians played my pages. One evening, after a performance in a cramped venue near Shimokitazawa, a stranger in a thick coat and taped glasses approached me. He handed me a battered business card that simply read, "Makino Tokyo Symphony Assistant Conductor." A week later, I found myself standing backstage at Suntory Hall, hands trembling, as seasoned musicians squinted through the first few bars of my new suite. Memory of Blue Trains. The principal cellist adjusted his end pin and said, "Ah, Nakamura, if we like it, we'll let you know. If we don't, you'll know." The air was electric. I watched from the wings as the first rehearsal stretched well into midnight. Volume, urgency, nerves, all surging, subsiding, falling into place. 2 months later at the world premiere, Nakamura's Blue Trains, I sat sandwiched between young composers and retired professors. My name was projected overhead. The music floated out, notes heavy with the city's longing, the ache of leaving and returning. Afterward, the applause felt unreal. The conductor, an old woman with hair bright as snow, found me backstage. She clasped my shoulder and said, "You've earned this." Word spread, the calls started coming first from other Japanese symphonies, then from Hong Kong, Singapore, Berlin. The work was crushing, but in the right way. I was exhausted, yes, but finally building something real. It was during this whirlwind that my mother called. Normally careful, she breezed into it. "Your cousin got us tickets. Is it true? You wrote for Tokyo Symphony." I could hear both revulsion and pride warring in her voice. My father in the background cleared his throat. "Your uncle said he saw your name. Maybe next time you write something lighter, eh?" That year, I was chosen to present a large-scale work during the city's Autumn Festival, a public, open-air concert in Central Uno Park, broadcast live, with the governor in attendance. Tokyo Symphony would play an hour of my music. The event was televised, covered on radio, and advertised for weeks on the doors of the same 7-Eleven where I'd once bought late snacks, face burning with embarrassment. Invitations arrived in thick, fancy envelopes. "Nakamura-san, bring your family if possible." I called my mother and suggested with carefully disguised hope that they attend. She was nervous. My father muttered, "We'll only cause you nerves." I could tell they were afraid of not fitting in, of not understanding, of my possible failure watched in plain daylight. But 2 weeks before the event, my sister messaged me a photo of their tickets with 3 rice ball stickers. No words, but the intent was there. On the afternoon of the performance, early October light filtered through yellowing ginkgo trees as I arrived at the park. Amphitheater seats flanked the outdoor stage, rows of folding chairs extending into the trees. Everything smelled like autumn, damp earth, fried festival food, the sweet burn of grilled sweet potatoes. Workers hustled between music stands and soundboards. I walked through a river of noise, nerves seething, carrying the black garment bag with my only good suit. I looked for my family in the crowd, but didn't see them. Instead, familiar faces from my childhood neighborhood shuffled in groups, the old men from the bathhouse's mahjong corner giving unsure nods. Reporters gathered around the press cordon, their questions tumbling out fast and rehearsed. "Do you still work at the assembly line, Nakamura-san?" I managed a smile, keeping my voice from shaking. "No, music is my life now." I stepped backstage, the chaos churning around me. My old music teacher, Sato-sensei, found me seconds before the show began. She had taught me chopin as a boy, her hands quick and precise. "It's raining families out there," she teased. "Are yours here?" "They are," I managed, throat tight. The musicians filed onto the stage. I stood alone behind the wings, hidden, unseen, until the MC called my name. As I walked into the bright lights, the crowd made a soft exhale, the air charged and electric. All I could hear was the dull roar of my blood. I turned and caught sight of my family, seated together near the front row center. My mother's hair glinted silver, my father sat rigid, face closed and unreadable, hands tight on his knees. My sister waved, then laughed in surprise. She wasn't expecting our eyes to meet. For the next hour, the orchestra moved through the suite I had written, a tapestry of city sounds, memories of riding the Yamamoto line as a lonely teenager, colors and shapes folding into one another. My grief, my hope, my endless longing for approval all swirled in the sound, swelling over the crowd like a tide. Behind the orchestra, city lights flicked on as dusk settled. Notes soared over the heads of the crowd, echoing against office buildings, apartment towers, centuries-old shrines barely in sight from the park's edge. The final movement began. The strings buzzed, tremulous, then the percussion hammered out the sound of distant train doors closing, a motif I'd buried in every piece since my factory days. The sound of leaving, yes, but also the hope buried in returning. As the last note faded, the applause started soft, then deepened into a rising wave. It spread, rolling out over hundreds who had never known my shame. From the stage, I saw my father rise before the rest. Unsure, maybe, but the first to stand. My mother clapped, tears breaking through, mouth open. Chai wiped her eyes, then grinned, pumping her arms. The skeptics, neighbors, old classmates, men in business suits who had doubted me stood, blinking into the floodlights. People who had once laughed behind closed doors now whispered my name to their children. Reporters crowded as I left the stage. Sato, my old supervisor, grey-haired now, shorter than before, waited at the margins. He looked at me, hand trembling as he extended it. "Nakamura-kun," he said, and for the first time there was no irony. "I was wrong." His eyes flickered with private regret. "You made us proud." I nodded, unable to speak. That evening, I walked my family through the bright festival streets, past food stalls, calliope music, lanterns drifting like slow stars. My father finally spoke, voice half a whisper. "What you did, it was beautiful. Your music, I understand now." My mother squeezed my arm in silent agreement, leaning into me as we passed the crowd. At a stand, my sister bought roasted chestnuts and we shared them, laughter folding away the years of disappointment. It wasn't all healed, there would always be roughness and unfinished threads between us. But in that moment, among the remnants of laughter and music, in the golden autumn air, I felt the loss recede. What remained was the testimony of survival, stitched into every note I'd written, and the knowledge that I had finally come home as myself. I stood at the park's edge, watching traffic drift down Ueno's avenues, the city alive, humming. I thought of all the nights spent dreading ridicule, the assembly line, the emails, the jeers. I had built a life from those ruins. Now, with the proof of my music echoing in the open air, the old shame no longer pressed at my chest. I would keep writing, I would keep returning, not as someone changed entirely, but as the same person, only at last no longer afraid.